Every single incident 100 years ago that happened to our people always started with the caucasoids, always concocting or just going into the black neighborhood and just harassing or shooting at our people, anything just to get something jumped off. 100 years ago in East St. Louis, approximately 100 men, women, and children were killed. And it was pretty cruel. Um, what happened was a car full of white men drove into East St. Louis, Illinois, and they started shooting into the homes of black men, women, and children while they were sleeping in their bed. And then the black residents decided they had enough and they took up arms. A few hours later, two plainclothes cops came through in an unmarked police car. And the black people felt they were acting very strange and suspicious. So they shot these officers to death. The next day, the white residents saw the car, with blood and everything in there, and then they decided to arm themselves as a mob, and they went into the black neighborhoods. They went between Broadway and Collinsville, the intersection downtown in East St. Louis, and they began stopping cars that had black folks in them, and they started just indiscriminately shooting any black person that was in a car. And they were shot execution style. And the next day, the mob went into the town, with the side of town where the blacks were on, and they killed the black men, women, and children. The men were lynched, the women were thrown off of bridges, and the children were thrown into fires. At that time, the entertainer Josephine Baker, she also lived in St. Louis, and she was 11 years old at the time. She described the scene as apocalyptic, and she said that was the reason why she left the United States when she got older. And also, the jazz trumpet player Miles Davis lived in East St. Louis for about 5 years of his life, and he said that incident had a deep negative effect on how he always felt about white people. This is why he could never like them, because of that incident. So over $400,000 of property damage was sustained, and they estimate, of course, the white people put out the number that 39 people were killed. W.E.B. Du Bois actually went into the town right after the massacre to find out what happened, and they estimated the death toll was about 200 people. You know, every time I read these massacres, my blood is boiling. I am not going to lie to you, especially when we see these things happening very similar today, where these devils unprovoked will just go into a racist rant out in public, and nobody's even bothering these people. They just are just the biggest antagonizers of trouble on the face of the earth. And then they want to know why the world is respecting them less and less. They don't deserve any respect. Seriously, they don't deserve an ounce of respect. Okay. This begs the question, why were so many murdered, and why doesn't no one seem to remember? Many blacks left the South during the Great Migration of the 20th century. They moved north in an attempt to escape the horrific conditions of life forced upon them. And, in the southern states, they had such a horrible life down there. That's why so many people left. When they moved north, they discovered that racism was not just in the states that left the Union to form the Confederacy. No, the entire nation is racist, just like it is now. The arrival of black workers from the South angered many whites. See how they just can't leave you alone. They just can't leave you alone. This is why when you talk about separation, they always whine, oh, I don't care. I don't care what some white person think is racist. I don't care. Please don't tell me about it because I don't care. And the citizens in the city of East St. Louis, just across the Mississippi River from St. Louis, were no different. For years, tension simmered between the black and white communities of that municipality. On the night of July 1st, 1917, things came to a tapping boil. Ironically, more black folks were arrested for this incident than whites, nothing new. In all, 9 whites and 12 blacks were convicted for crimes related to the massacre. The absurdity of this fact led a congressman who investigated the incident and its aftermath to say, listen to this, it doesn't appear that you can convict a white man of anything that happened here on July 2nd, 1917. These devils got hell to pay. We need to remember what happened in East St. Louis. We must remember, because while many paint black folks as having a pathological predisposition to engage in riotous activity, the vast majority of race riots in the United States are, in fact, race massacres that were committed by white people against innocent black Americans. Wow. It's important to remember that in the early 20th century, communities in the North, Midwest, and West were just as invested in racial violence and white supremacy as communities in the South. As black folks fled subjugation in one part of America, mass violence against bludgeoning black communities was a key feature of the white reaction to this influx of refugees fleeing racial oppression. Part of the reason race riots were so prevalent in the early 20th century was the economic anxiety of white Northerners confronted by a new black workforce that was willing to work for less in an attempt to establish roots in a new town. It is this same white economic anxiety that is partially responsible for giving us a racist, misogynist 45 president. If Americans were better students of history, they would have been better prepared for the white lash to black achievement that happened on November 7th, 2016. You know what? I don't care if 45 is there. The racism in this country, it's a whole history of it long before he became president. So this is just ingrained in these people. They just want to always be a nuisance to black people no matter what. And I say separation is the only thing that's going to work at this point in time. I am not willing to try anything else because everything has been tried by black people, past and present. I don't want to assimilate. I don't want to become part of anything regarding integration. I just want us to separate and be left alone. That's all I want at this point. And we build our own economic prosperity. We police our own selves and let them just go and be in their white community, because their community right now is in probably the worst shape out of everyone in America. The only thing that they're not suffering as much economically, but everything else for them is collapsing very quickly. Please leave your comments and subscribe, and if you can donate to my channel, please do. Peace, family.